So now that we're in Photoshop, let's drag this over. So we have all of our images that are now their own documents. And the great thing is that now we can just go through each one of these images, think about how they affect the different channels. So everything from bump to roughness to the color. And we can just very, very quickly export all the info we need that will then stack up inside of Substance Painter as triplanar projections. The most important layer here is going to be the base. And so the base is the area which sees the least amount of detail. It has the least amount of contrast, and it doesn't feature these major pop-marked zones. The idea is that if we have a base, we want that to be as subtle as possible so that we can take all the other maps and basically lay that on top. So I'm looking here specifically at the top of the head. And in Photoshop, that's going to correlate with this image that we've selected right here. So to do this, let's start off by making the color. If we go down to this little half moon icon and we use a gradient map, this is going to reassign the colors based on their value. So towards the left-hand side right here, this correlates with all the black values. The right is going to be all the whites. And we can basically just transform, let's say, things towards the black here, towards anything that we want, and likewise here with the tones as they approach white. So anyway, let's do this. If we go back to our reference, I'm going to really quickly just take a little screenshot here, copy it to my clipboard, and then paste it as its own layer in here, so Control V. Once I'm in here, let's sample a couple of colors that are towards the head. So let's say right there, and then I'll pick a lighter color, let's say right about there. Again, the idea is to be pretty subtle about all of this. So once we have that, let's go back to our layers, turn this off. Let's click this, but Photoshop has something weird here. We need to unlink this mask or just delete this mask. Let's just say delete, so that we're now selecting this right here and we still maintain these two colors. The reason why that's important is because if we double click this icon now and we go to sample some colors, we can then just go over here, find our dark, and then go to the right hand side and find the bright. But if we look closely to this reference, you'll notice that the veins are the actual bright areas and then everything else is darker. So we need to actually switch this around. Very easy to do. I'm going to double click this, go back to our gradients, and then just reverse like that. And there we go. This is what I'm after. Once we have that, let's save it out. I'll use Control-Shift-S, and let's do this as a TIFF. So for right now, like I said, it doesn't really matter what you name this. If you're going to name every single one of these photos and it's going to get deleted anyways, probably not worth it. So yeah, if you do anything, just do something like that. Something that doesn't take any time, because you'll save out a lot of these files. And I know some folks might say that's not organized enough, but if you want to save something once you're done with this project, then that's when you can organize. But when you're in production, you want to be fast. So image compression, none. This is all fine. Just hit OK. When it comes to the bump, you want to do something very consistently amongst all of your black and white maps, because otherwise you might have bumps that don't line up with each other. So here's what you can do to do that. Turn off that gradient map. Let's now make a solid color, and we're going to make this into a perfectly gray value. So B here is the black value of 50%, saturation of 0. Now go to the blend mode and set this to luminosity. And for this opacity, this is where you can set it to whatever value that you like. So if you say 80%, now across all the maps that you save out for bump, be sure that that opacity stays at 80%. And for the most part, all of your maps should be able to generally be in the same spot when it comes to bump. So that's good. Again, save this out. We can say bump if we want. There we go. Now we have bump. And then for the roughness, we want to set these values to something that's a bit more intentional. So I'm thinking about this skull in general. If we're thinking about the light sources, again, what I talked about in shading theory, think about that light source. How easy is it for you to tell the shape of the light source as it hits the skull? For the most part, this is a very rough object. There's a lot of roughness going on. We can change the actual reference image, and you'll see that some of these skulls like this feature a lot more specularity. So it really just depends on the reference that you're using. But for the most part, these skulls have a fair bit of roughness. So I'll say that their values are probably around 0.4 to 0.5, generally speaking. And we can always adjust that later on, but I think that for now, that should be what we aim for. So if I know that the roughness values will be about 0.4, 0.5, I can get this map to exist within those ranges using another gradient map. So now I can go gradient map, and this time, any areas that were black are now going to, let's say, be on the lower end of that range. So let's say that'll be around 40%. And then let's also turn off the saturation, so S0. Towards the top here, let's make the maximum roughness be around 60%. So I'll go a bit higher at 60. And then hit OK. And now for this base roughness, those values exist within this map. We've been able to contain those values nicely. Let's save that out. So now we'll say granite 3, this will be rough. And so now that we've made these 3 maps, let's go back here to the skull, get rid of this preset bone, and for right now, turn off occlusion and edges. We'll talk about that later. And then make a new fill. Let's go to our textures. There's the color, bump, roughness, bring it in there, and shift click to highlight all of these. These are all going to be textures. And let's import this into the project itself. So this will bake with the substance file. These images will. And that's again why the naming doesn't really matter. It's going to be deleted later anyway, and these images will save with the file. So now we import that, and we can just drag and drop what we have. So here's the color. For the height, that's going to represent our bump. So we'll go right there. And then we have the roughness that goes right here. If we go towards the top, let's also turn off metallic and normal for right now. Change the projection to triplanar projection. And also, if we go up here, we can go to height. And for right now, turn that down. So we'll go maybe something like 8, a really low value for the time being. Once we have that, let's go to the scale and set this to, let's say, 3. So this repeats 3 times across the whole skull, like that. Go ahead and repeat this process until you have a base layer that you're really happy with. Again, the idea is that we want to try out these different textures that we've selected. You never really know if they're going to work until you put it on the model. So try out a few ideas. Maybe I'll combine this with what I just did. And once you have a base that you like, then you'll want to move on to the other layers.